Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Business First review. In this section, we're going to be looking at all the Corp cards in the pack. First up, we have a new asset for HB. This is Advanced Assembly Lines. It's 1 to res, 1 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's a facility type. When you res Advanced Assembly Lines, gain 3 credits. Then it has trash, install a non-agenda card from HQ, paying the install cost. You cannot use this ability during a run. This is an interesting little economy/development tool that I think could maybe see a little bit of play, especially in ETF. Now, ETF's been the main way that we've played HB pretty much the whole history of the game, but I think this really is limited outside of that ID. The main thing I'm seeing with ETF is that you'll get a credit when you install it, then you'll get 3 when you res it, and then you could use its trash ability to get 1 more credit out of it if you use the ability on your opponent's turn. This also works reasonably well if you're already doing the Breaker Bay thing. You could have Breaker Bay installed in a server, res this for free, then you'd get a credit when you install your Adonis or whatever at the end of your opponent's turn, get to res it for free, get more credits. The main problem I have is as kind of a weaker economic tool, this is really going to be competing with other cards for deck slots, and I don't really see you being willing to cut something like Eve or Adonis or even Breaker Bay Grid to accommodate this thing. Maybe if you were playing like the Museum of History kind of thing where you had to play more cards, this could be better, but I don't know if this is really going to make the cut in your standard sort of food coat style. I wanted to point out that this card kind of represents a continuation of a new trend within HB. I had said in the past when I was talking about the card Test Ground that that card was really bad, there wasn't much to do with it, but if we saw more win-resed effects, it could be a lot stronger. And here's another win-resed effect along with like Adonis and Eve and stuff like that. I think that it's got a lot of good ideas going for it, and I think that this could be a better card in the future if we see more reasons to be doing this like end of turn installation thing, or if we have more ways to de-res this and abuse the gain 3 aspect. So this is an interesting design, I just don't see it immediately slotting into the most popular ways to play HB. Next up we have another asset for HB. This is Lakshmi Smart Fabrics. It's 1 to res, it's 3 to trash, it's 3 influence. Whenever you res a card, place a power counter on it, and then it has X hosted power counters. Reveal an agenda worth X points from HQ. The runner cannot steal copies of that agenda for the remainder of this turn. I really like this design, mainly because we haven't seen a lot of assets that help you score stuff, and I think this is a really good way to try to do that. The main concept here is that if you have multiple copies of an agenda, you can use this to make it easier to score one of them. So that's obviously going to help with like a 3 for 2. You could have some counters on this thing and just play a 3 for 2 naked. And then if the runner runs that server, you could pop this thing off and they wouldn't be able to steal that. You could also use this to maybe score something like mandatory upgrades. It's going to make it a lot easier to score on mandatory upgrades if you have something where you can defend it for the rest of the turn. And I think that's really the operative part of this card. The thing that makes this card even worth considering is the fact that once you use the ability, it protects it for the rest of the turn. I think it's going to be reasonably easy to charge this thing up, especially since you only need like 2 or 4 counters to score basically any agenda. But unfortunately, I think this card is probably going to fall into the same bucket as something like IT Department. That card had a lot of hype when it first came out, and the main issue with it is that you just don't have enough room in most HB decks to play assets that aren't economy tools. You don't really have enough deck slots to play a bunch of assets that are defensive, especially since as HB, we have some of the best ice in the game, so we really want to cram our defensive cards full of ice. I really like what's going on with this design, and I think this is a good idea, But I think ultimately we're probably not going to play this because we already have Ash, which is an upgrade, makes it a lot easier to defend and use. Something like this, I think there's going to be a lot of situations where if you're relying on it for defense, the runner could just deal with this ahead of time. So I don't know. I like this card a lot, but I'm a little iffy on it fitting into current HB builds. Next up, we have a new operation for HB. This is Product Recall. It's 0 to play, it's 2 influence, it's Alliance. And that means it costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance HB cards in your deck. Trash a rezzed asset or upgrade. If you do, gain credits equal to its trash cost. I think it's dangerously tempting to consider this for your standard HB deck. We already play Eve in almost all HB decks. That's got a 5 trash cost. So you could res an Eve, run it down a bunch of credits, and then right before it dies, you could trash it and get 5 out of it. That's not going to be worth it in my eyes. The big thing is, we already have plenty of other conditional ways to make burst credits, within HB even. Like we have peak efficiency, successful demonstration, and then there's always something like restructure. And I don't think really any of those see play. Not to mention we could just play more copies of something like Archived Memories or Reclamation Order to just get back like a hedge fund or something. So it seems to me that this card is going to rely not on you playing lots of expensive to trash stuff, but rather increasing the trash cost of cards in your deck. So we already have Encryption Protocol as well as Oaktown Grid to do that within HB. Now the heavy hitter when it comes to increasing the trash cost of stuff is Industrial Genomics. This is going to be a way that you could absolutely skyrocket the cost to trash stuff. And I think that deck could kind of use a burst economy card like this anyway. Plus, it's not really going to be a huge requirement to play the 6 other HB cards to meet this Alliance thing. I think that there's already plenty of great options to do that. We obviously have Eli and Architect when it comes to high quality ice. But we also have a bunch of different assets. A lot of the versions that play Mushin Notion play Cerebral Overrider. So I definitely think that it's possible to get the Alliance requirement in the Industrial Genomics deck. And I think this would be a pretty good, like maybe 1 or 2 of, as a way to have another burst economy tool. Next up, we have a new ID for Jinteki. This is Palani Foods, Sustainable Growth. It's a 45-15 like normal. It's a division type. The first time each turn the runner draws a card, gain a credit. This card is so generically and obviously good that I kind of hate it. We've seen in the past with other IDs where they have these gain a credit effects that are really easy to realize. Those become some of the most dominant and sort of creativity crushing IDs in the game. We've definitely seen that with ETF and with Kate, both of which have like basically gain a credit every turn type effects that are extremely easy to realize. They're barely even a requirement. I hate to say it, but I think that's basically what we're looking at here. Now, I think one of the big differences is that Jinteki already has other really good IDs that this is competing with, so I don't anticipate this instantly turning into ETF, but I think that this is the type of effect where you barely even need to tailor your deck to make it work, and so much of the Jinteki card pool already fits with this. You can do the damage thing, because if you damage them, they're going to be prone to having to draw more cards. But even if you're not doing a very damage-intensive style, the runner's going to have to draw cards. And the next card that we're going to look at is basically going to be a generic economy, drip economy asset for this card. So I think this definitely sees play right out of the pack because it's so easy to build a deck around this thing. It seems to me that you can basically do anything that we've seen within the faction with this ID, and a lot of times you're just going to end up with a more stable economy. I think really the only reason why RP would hesitate to switch to this thing is because it's much harder to protect a Sundew without the RP ID. I really like the idea of printing an ID that is very economy focused for Jinteki, but man, I just don't like the idea of printing this gain a credit when the runner does one of the absolute most basic actions in the game. And that's not even considering all the effects that draw cards on the Corp's turn. So like if they have an Astrolabe in play and you create a server, you're going to get a credit. If they have a drug dealer in play, you're going to get a credit when it triggers. This to me, it just seems like it's going to be extremely easy to realize the economic benefit. So I think this is absolutely a good card, but I kind of don't like the design because to me, it just seems kind of boring in the way that it's good. And I think there's definitely ways that they could do economic IDs for Jinteki that would be a lot more interesting than just you gain a credit basically every turn. Next up is an asset for Jinteki. This is Palani Agroplex. It's 1 to res, it's 5 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's a facility. When your turn begins, each player draws a card. Well, first off, this is kind of a no-brainer for the ID that we just looked at. Most of the time when the runner draws cards, it's going to be on the runner's turn. They're just going to click to draw a card, their wild side's going to trigger, their max is going to trigger, something like that. So this is going to be an easy way that you're going to be able to trigger the Foods ID on your turn. I could see this being reasonably okay in some other styles of Jinteki as well. Like in a PE style, if you were looking to run them out of cards, this could maybe be pretty good. So this to me, it seems kind of like a no-brainer in the food style, and I could really see this being okay in a couple other builds just because of the high trash costs and the cheap res cost. Next up, we have a new piece of ice for Jinteki. This is Harvester. It's 1 to res, it's 1 influence. It's a 3 strength code gate. It has 2 subroutines that are both the same. The runner draws 3 cards, then discards down to his or her maximum hand size. This has got to be one of my favorite ice designs for quite a long time. This is so awesome. The basic idea here is if you're playing the 1,000 cuts deck them sort of style I was just talking about, you're going to force them to draw 6 cards, and then they're going to have to discard down to their maximum hand size. So that's almost certainly going to mean that they're going to have to pitch some cards that are useful. And if what you're trying to do is burn through their deck, especially in a metagame that's dominated by things like Wild Side or Max, where so they're automatically drawing a ton of cards anyway, something like this is really going to burn through their deck really, really fast. The other thing I like about this is as a specialized kind of funky piece of ice, it's only 1 influence. So that's going to mean a deck like Argus Security that maybe is really focused on using underway renovation to mill a bunch of their deck. This could be absolutely brutal in a deck like that. And I think the concept of running the runner out of cards is something that has been maybe like 85% of the way there, especially out of PE. And a card like this is going to be a huge benefit for a strategy like that. And I would really, really like to see more decks like that become viable. We've started to see stuff kind of like that with Industrial Genomics, but I think a card like this is going to push us to reconsider PE or Argus, or maybe the few other styles where you're trying to run them out of cards. I really, really like this. I think this is a very timely card in an era that's dominated by like Wild Side and Faust. And I think that this is really going to make us reconsider some of the archetypes that have never been all the way there. Next up, we have a new agenda for NBN. This is Remote Data Farm. It's a 4 for 2. It's an expansion subtype. Your maximum hand size is increased by 2. This thing sucks. There's no reason to play a 4 for 2 like this in NBN. I've said many times, we're never going to play 4 for 2s in NBN unless they have some sort of win accessed or difficult to steal effect. Explodapalooza is the only one that's breached the card pool for the last I don't know how long, And the big thing is, as long as Beal is not rotated from the card pool, I don't see any incentive to play something like this. Now we have an ID within faction that also increases our hand size, so maybe in the future, if there's some sort of incentive to having a big hand size, especially some sort of economic effect, I could see this being something we would consider. But for now, this is just going to sit in the box next to all those other bad NBN agendas that basically nobody has ever considered. The next card is an upgrade for NBN. This is Disposable HQ. It's a 0 to res, 5 to trash upgrade, 1 influence. It's an ambush. If it's accessed from R&D, the runner must reveal it. When the runner accesses Disposable HQ, you may add any number of cards from HQ to the bottom of R&D. This is one of those cards that's looking forward to a post-Jackson Howard metagame. We definitely need more effects that are kind of on the same line as Jackson Howard that give you a way to flush agendas out of your hand. And this is maybe a card that would help do that, especially if they access it out of R&D, doesn't cost anything, you're just going to get to stick the agendas on the bottom of your deck. You could potentially also use it as like a bluff remote server, or maybe you could put it on a server you anticipate them accessing, like, you know, your San server or something like that. I don't know. I don't really see this being worth the deck slots at the moment, but I do think this is a really cool and interesting way to look forward to a post-Jackson Howard metagame where not every Corp has this really easy way to both draw cards and flush agendas. Next up, we have a new agenda for Weiland. This is a 4-for-2 called New Construction. It's public, which means you install it face up. Whenever you advance New Construction, you may install a card from HQ in a new server, and res that card, ignoring all costs, if there are 5 or more advancement tokens on New Construction. The first thing to point out is that this allows you to install cards in a new server. That means not ICE. ICE are installed protecting servers, not in the server. So that's going to mean that you're probably going to want to use this to spam out a whole ton of new servers, or you could potentially use something like Dedication Ceremony to ramp up the counters on this thing, and then use the 5+ thing to res otherwise very difficult to res assets or upgrades. So I immediately thought of Corporate Town. That card, especially in the current metagame, would be really strong if you didn't have to forfeit an agenda. This might be a way to avoid having to forfeit the agenda. This card's definitely going to be at home in a deck that plays tons and tons of remotes. That's probably going to mean lots of assets as well. So we're probably looking at Gagarin with the currently available IDs. And I think that this is probably going to be second fiddle, even in that deck, to Oaktown Renovation. Just because Oaktown Renovation is easily one of the best agendas in the game, at least at 4-for-2. So you're probably going to play Oaktown and this, but it seems to me like this as maybe like a 2-of could be really strong in a deck that's looking to set up a whole ton of assets, a whole ton of remotes, and use them for some sort of economic or like kind of a denial disruption sort of thing. I like this. I think this is different enough, but it's not really bad. It seems to me like it's hard to use, but if you can use it, it's going to do quite a bit. And that's really what I like to see out of 4-for-2s. I think this is a really interesting addition to the Weiland card pool. Next up, we have a new asset for Weiland. This is Mumbad Construction Co. It's 4 to res, it's 3 to trash, it's 3 influence. When your turn begins, place 1 advancement token on it. Then it has 2 credits, move 1 advancement token from this to a face-up card. With Dedication Ceremony, and now this card, it seems to me that the design team is really starting to figure out the correct power level of advancement token cards. But that also kind of means that they've abandoned a lot of the advancement ice stuff. This isn't really going to work with that because it's only going to work on face-up cards, and like the Constellation Cycle, those are only going to work if they're face down in terms of reaping benefits out of advancing them. So this to me seems like it's more of a fast advance tool. But the interesting thing is that you can fast advance potentially 5 for 3s or other just really big agendas as long as they're face up. Now we could use something maybe like Casting Call to install any agenda face up, but obviously we also have all the public agendas. So like Hollywood Renovation is going to potentially be really nasty with this. If we have enough counters on it, we could just fast score right out of hand a 5 for 3. And that could mean that we could chain together a couple of agendas, really easily score out. Now that's of course going to involve our runner opponent just letting us sit with this 4 to res, 3 to trash asset and build up a bunch of counters. But with Dedication Ceremony, that's a really good source of counters, a really good way to juice this thing up, to potentially use it to score agendas out of hand. This to me is just such an interesting and cool new tool for Weiland. I definitely welcome this to the card pool. I think a lot of people are going to be playing around with this thing. I wanted to quickly mention that moving counters to cards isn't the same as advancing them. So like if you move a counter from this to like an Oaktown, you're not going to get money. I don't really see that as being that big of a deal because you're going to basically get to clickless advance agendas. And advancing agendas without clicks is really powerful, pretty much however you end up doing it. Next up we have a neutral agenda. This is Corporate Sales Team. It's a 4 for 2. It's an expansion subtype. When you score it, place 10 credits on it. When each player's turn begins, take a credit from Corporate Sales Team. This is certainly not flashy, it's not really the sexiest card, but I am absolutely pumped and thrilled with something like this. 4 for 2s have just been so notoriously bad in the game's history. I've been so critical of them, and one of the things I think that has been a big problem with them is that they have weird, specialized effects rather than just something that's generically good and easy to realize benefit from. And it doesn't get more generically good than just giving you a bunch of free credits. This is the type of agenda that basically any deck that needs a 4 for 2 could consider. I think that 4 for 2s should have powerful effects when you score them, and I think that those powerful effects should be good at virtually any stage of the game. This is exactly that sort of design. I'm really excited to see this sort of changing philosophy of 4 for 2s. We've seen a lot better 4 for 2s lately, and as a neutral, no influence cost agenda, this is exactly the type of design that should exist. You're going to get 2 credits on a turn cycle. It's going to be really easy to realize because all you have to do is score it. Man, this is good. I really, really like this. The last card in the pack is a neutral asset called Pad Factory. It's 2 to res, 3 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's Alliance and it's a facility. This card costs 0 influence if you have 3 pad campaigns in your deck. Then it has click, place 1 advancement token on a card. You cannot score that card until your next turn. I think there's some pretty good ideas going on with this thing. First of all, I really like the Alliance requirement of just specifically naming a card you have to have 3 copies of. And when it's a card like Pad Campaign, it isn't exactly a big requirement. That's about as generic as drip economy tools come. So I think it'd be pretty easy to accommodate 3 pads in any deck where you'd actually want to play this thing. The most obvious thing to say about the click ability is that it saves you a credit, right? Like normally when you advance something, you have to spend a click and a credit. This is going to only require you spending a click. So that could be useful if you're scoring like a 5 for 3 where you normally install advance. Same thing with a 4 for 2, you could install and then advance it once or twice with this, saving you a few credits. This could also be pretty good with, dare I say, advanceable ice. Because normally one of the big problems with advanceable ice is that you have to spend yourself broke just to get your ice advanced enough that it matters. It doesn't say that you can't res the card, it's just score. So if you're advancing a card that you wouldn't score anyway, this is going to just save you some credits. I think this is pretty narrow. It's going to be reasonably hard to use, but the alliance requirement is pretty easy to meet if you have some way to derive value from the click effect. And it seems to me like the biggest question mark with this is just finding the right home where you're going to be advancing something enough that saving a few credits on the advancement is going to be worth including a card like this in your deck. That's going to do it for my business first review. There's two major remarks I have about this pack. First of all, the Corp half is way better. Not only did we get more cards, but I think we got more useful cards as well. And the other thing is, I can't remember a pack that I felt so divided about. There are so many cards where I either love them or hate them in this pack. That said, the cards that I felt positive about show some maturity with designs. They show corrections to errors in the card pool in the past. And I think there's a lot of promise in what's going on with some of these card designs. There's definitely a few cards where it seems like they're kind of a preview of stuff to come, and I'm really, really anxious and curious to see what's next. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel, press the button that looks like a thumbs up, and let me know what I'm right or wrong about in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you pretty soon for some more Netrunner stuff.